The draft is over. Been working tirelessly on the rookie guide over the past month. It is done. Well, now we're working on updating it for the draft, but the pre-draft one has been completed. We are back in podcast mode. We are here to talk about post-draft and what it means for a couple of these players. Number one player on the list is not a rookie that we're going to talk about. We are going to talk about Lamar Jackson because what the Ravens did in this offseason leads me to believe that Lamar Jackson breaking fantasy is coming back. We are going to see it again. We are going to see another 2019 MVP caliber season from Lamar Jackson. He is not being priced that way, and he should be. Let's dive into it. Lamar Jackson is rumored to be a poor passer. People think of Lamar Jackson as being unable to pass at the NFL level. Here's the thing. There is absolutely no evidence to that. Lamar Jackson is a low volume passer. That is entirely different than a bad passer. Bad passers are inefficient. Lamar Jackson is, he's not great, but he's not inefficient, that's for sure. When you look at things like his PFF passing grade, he comes in middle, almost every metric that we look at, he comes in middle of the pack because that's what he is. He's a league average passer with break fantasy potential on the ground. So his PFF passing grade, 16th in the NFL, completely average. When you look at things like his air yards per attempt, according to playerprofiler.com, and his accuracy rating, according to playerprofiler.com, his accuracy rating isn't very good. It's 7.1. That's number 28 in the NFL. And you're thinking, well, I think you just told me he was a pretty good passer. Here's the thing. You need to adjust for the depth of the pass. If the quarterback is only passing it in and around the line of scrimmage, it should be pretty friggin' easy to be an accurate passer at that depth. Lamar Jackson is not that guy. He is chucking the ball down the field. He had 8.6 air yards per attempt, number 4 in the NFL. So what I suspect what's happening here is that he's being punished in accuracy rating for throwing the ball down the football field. Luckily for us, there is another website that we can use that tells us if this is true. rbsdm.com has a fantastic website, and they look at a lot of interesting metrics in regards to quarterbacks. One of them is CPOE, that's completion percentage over expected. So they are essentially depth adjusting the completion percentage to see if these players are completing passes at a rate similar to their peers based on the depth of the target. So they're controlling for that phenomenon. Lamar Jackson comes in, you may guess, number 16 in the NFL because of course he does. He's a league average passer. He has a 1.3 CPOE. He's league average. As we know, he has been league average since he entered the NFL. He's never been a bad passer. He's been a league average passer. He just doesn't get the volume. Fantasy points per game for Lamar Jackson last season were 22.7, number 7 in the NFL. That's pretty good. Here's the thing. Baltimore passed the ball 25.9 times per game. That is one of the lowest we've ever seen, to be perfectly frank. That is a really, really low total for pass attempts. They were number 32 by a little over almost two attempts per game. New England was at 27.5. Tennessee was at 30th with 30.1. That's usually where we see the bottom team is in and around that 30 attempts per game spot. That's league bottom. Baltimore is in the cellar of the bottom. It's like they were really, really bad. But in 2019, Baltimore passed the ball 29.4 times per game. That is when Lamar Jackson set the world on fire, won the MVP, and destroyed fantasy football. Absolutely destroyed it. So why didn't they pass last year? My assumption here is that, they maybe had a bad year, but they also had Hollywood Brown as the leading receiver with 769 yards. Hollywood Brown is not a leading receiver. He is the ultimate beta. He's like 167 pounds. Anybody who comes to the NFL 167 pounds is probably not somebody that I'm interested in drafting, especially if they're in the 2021 class and they're getting drafted super early. Then I'm really not interested in it. But Hollywood Brown isn't an alpha. That's the point here. Lamar Jackson doesn't have a go-to receiver that he can just chuck the ball up to and expect him to make plays. Marquise Brown is a burner. He's very good at what he does, but what he does isn't make plays out of nothing. Mark Andrews is a very good tight end. Mark Andrews had 701 yards. He was the second leading receiver on the team. Mark Andrews is not a Travis Kelce. He should not be he shouldn't be in this position. Mark Andrews is a very nice tight end. He should probably be a quality number 3 option in the passing attack, or maybe a number 2 option to a true alpha, not a field stretcher. And then we have Willie Snead, who's, you don't need to tell me who Willie Snead is. You don't need me to tell you who Willie Snead is. Then we have Miles Boykin. Miles Boykin had 266 yards as a sophomore. Oh my goodness. Remember when there was buy low articles on Miles Boykin? Hilarious. Remember when people think that you should always chase athleticism and size at the wide receiver position because DK Metcalf? Except Miles Boykin is that, and he sucks. So anyways, Devin Duvernay was next. He had 201 receiving yards. And then we have the running backs, Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Nick Boyle's tight end, but you get the idea. Then we have Mark Ingram. Basically, they don't have good wide receivers. Personnel dictates usage. And if you don't have players that can make plays, you don't throw the football. I cannot blame the Baltimore Ravens coaching staff for not airing it out with this kind of personnel. So let's talk about what the Ravens did in the offseason, which is what is giving me this optimism that we are going to see a return to glory for Lamar Jackson. Well, in free agency, they went out and signed Sammy Watkins, who may or may not be very good at football. It's hard to know. He's probably fine. He's probably better than Miles Boykin. I can tell you that much. And I would say that's a step in the right direction. He's certainly no alpha, though, so let's not get carried away on that one. But they signed Sammy Watkins. They drafted in the first round of the NFL draft Rashad Bateman, who we're going to talk about next. And they drafted in the fourth round of the NFL draft Tylan Wallace, who I believe only fell to the fourth round because he and his brother have about a handful of ACL tears in their young lives. So he's a bit of an injury risk, but he's a good player. We know he's a good player because he produced basically every time he touched the field. So he's very good at football. The Ravens added 3 quality pass catchers, maybe not superstars, but quality pass catchers, one of which being first-round pick Rashad Bateman, who we very much like, just not as much as we used to. Anyways, so I think that we could see a return to glory for the Baltimore Ravens passing attack. I don't think that's out of the range of outcomes. So let's do a projection here. Lamar Jackson has averaged 7.5 yards per attempt throughout his career. What if they can just get to a league worst offense? What if they're not in the basement of the league worst offenses? What if they're actually at league worst? So let's pretend for a moment that they get back to their 2019 level of roughly 30 attempts per game. 30 attempts per game times 7.5 yards per attempt is 225 yards per game. That would be the best mark of his entire career. And let's not forget that he completely broke fantasy 2 years ago with not 225 yards per game. In 2020, he only had 183 yards per game. So this would represent a 42 yards per game difference, which would be 1.68 points per game just from passing yardage. 1.68, yeah. Just to get to league bottom, 1.68 points per game, just if they get back to league bottom. We are not projecting anything crazy. We're just projecting what they did in 2019 based off the personnel moves that they made in the offseason, which indicates to me they probably want to pass the ball. And then it's TD volume. We're going to get some TDs out of this as well, right? They're going to pass more, so they're going to have more touchdowns, presumably more passing touchdowns. So his career average is 7.2% for his 7.2% touchdown rate for his career. 7.2% times 30 attempts per game times 16 games is 35 touchdowns, roughly 2.2 per game. Last year, he had 1.7 per game. That is 0.5 touchdowns more per game, which is another 3 fantasy points per game. You can see where I'm going here, right? We have 3 fantasy points per game increase plus 1.6 fantasy points per game increase. That's 4.68 fantasy points per game increase on the number 7 running back in the NFL last year. Now, obviously, this doesn't work this simple. This isn't how I actually do projections. We're not quite to that stage of the offseason yet, but this is just a high-level projection to give you an idea of what we're talking about when it comes to the range of outcomes for one Lamar Jackson. We are talking, what's going to happen here is that we're going to get our rushing probably knocked down a little bit, but we're probably going to get more plays overall because we know, and the Baltimore Ravens, I can assure you, know that pass volume is more efficient. If they're passing the football, they will run more plays because they will extend more drives. So it's not completely out of the range of outcomes that Lamar Jackson returns to his perch as the quarterback 1 in fantasy football in 2021, and I'm here for all of it.